Hey, everybody. Eric Bailey, Eli Letterman talking OU athletics again. Eli, it's good to see you again. I hope you think I'm looking like a coach. I am actually in the OU media room. I found a quiet place to do my part of the podcast. So I got the OU banner behind me. It's real. I promise. It's not something I threw out there. So I feel like
I
I'm,
was
I feel
gonna
like I'm ready to take questions.
I was gonna say I love your new wallpaper. It looks great. The wallpaper you put up.
It's real. I can even pull up the Sooner Sports mic if you
Oh
want.
wow.
So yeah.
You
So I
really do look like it feels like we're back in like the right after, the seasons that got played after COVID-19 hit and we're talking to coaches on Zoom. This would take me all
yeah.
back.
Well, now I know Porter Moser's life up here at this podium. So so anyway, let's change the subject. Yeah, that was just fun. That was the fun part of this. A lot of busy week for football, basketball. It's been crazy. And if you don't mind, let's start with basketball because I
Let's
think
talk hoops.
Tuesday night you made the trip to Allen Fieldhouse. Full disclosure, I went to school at Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, then transferred to KU. So I've been to Allen Fieldhouse for a handful of games, and I've covered some games there. And you did a unique thing. Instead of covering OU's close call against the Kansas, I really think they let one get away. You had a chance to watch Porter Moser in front of 16,000 people coach. And just how much fun was that to write your story that you did?
Yeah, well, I guess in the interest, if we're doing disclosures, we should disclose that I'm a University of Missouri grad. He's got a lot of feelings about KU. But before I get to that, you and I talked about this yesterday. I'm a Missouri grad. I have a lot of reasons to dislike KU, but Allen Fieldhouse remains probably one of the most special, I think, college venues in the nation, I guess in the world, for that matter. And it doesn't disappoint. And the reality is, not knowing when OU is going to be going to the SEC, not knowing what the basketball schedules will necessarily look like in the Big 12 if they're still there next year. This might have been one of Oklahoma's last trips to Allen Fieldhouse, if not the last trip. And so there was all that swirling around. And then to go with the fact that the Sooners haven't won there in 30 years, and what a way it would have been to finish if that was the last time kind of they're guaranteed to go there. So it was quite a setting. The place didn't disappoint. And as you said, I decided not to make this a standard game reporting trip. Tried to think a little bit outside the box. And so I found myself, I didn't sit in my assigned press seat. I found a rare open seat inside of Allen Fieldhouse and just took a view of Porter Moser and kept my eyes on him as the game went on, really from start to finish. And it turned out to be a fun piece and quite a game. That helped me in terms of the storytelling, was getting to watch Porter Moser and the way he coached and reacted and responded in a game where the Sooners really played well for, I'd say, the first exceptionally well for the first 37 minutes. You can have complaints about the fouls, you can have complaints about the 3-point shooting, but they played well. And then it was just that in those final minutes, having an eye on Porter Moser as that lead disintegrated, as some ill-advised shots went up. It was interesting to watch, made for an interesting story, and getting to tell it, I guess, from, in a sense, Porter Moser's perspective.
I tweeted this after the game. 6 of the last 9 visits to Allen Fieldhouse for the Sooners, they've had a chance to win. And this was probably one of their best opportunities, being up 10 with the 5 to go. I mean, it was just, looked like they had the game in control. And it just looked like one of those times when the team, they're just put in a position where they're not really familiar with. It's hard to finish games when you just don't know how to finish. And it's so hard to finish when you're in Allen Fieldhouse with that crowd. It seemed like they woke
There's something
up.
about that building, man.
Yeah, something about that building. And then, Oklahoma, hindsight's always 2020. It just seemed like they settled for a lot of 3-pointers at the end. Took away, they weren't aggressive. I thought they could have gone to the hole a little bit. Now, that being said, I don't know, are you going to get the whistle in Allen Fieldhouse for going to the hole?
Yeah.
You never know. But just a tough loss. And this would have been a huge win for Oklahoma's resume.
They've now lost 3 Big 12 games, each one to a ranked opponent by a total of 8 points. I mean, the Sooners, as Porter Moser put it afterward, and he was struggling a bit at the podium. I just think he was so frustrated and really hadn't. The time between leaving the court and talking to us was not enough time to process that game. He said, though, we're right there. And he's not wrong. They have been right there. But the problem is they've been right there, not the guy, I don't know, on top of it. Whatever you need to be to close out these games, because they've been close. It's funny. If I had told you pregame that Kansas was going to shoot 31 second half free throws and that OU would shoot 2 of 17 from 3-point range, you'd have said no way they could have won that game. But they really had it in their hands. And it goes back to this defense in the final 4 minutes that Porter Moser has talked about. They're kind of hard stats to come upon. He's got them. He's shown us the folder he's got. He'll show that off, but trying to find them anywhere, trying to do that, Matt. pretty challenging. So we don't know the metrics, but the eye test tells you everything. And it was the latest story against Kansas was their defense at the end of games. Something is missing there. And the other night they were in foul trouble, and they were, I think by the end of the game, so worried about defending and not fouling that it almost came back to bite them. But it didn't take much. Kansas went on its run. The Sooners probably could have managed the game better. You talked about some of those shots early in the shot clock, 3-pointers they didn't need, and from guys they probably didn't need them from. And those are the things, and that's where Kansas can get you. It doesn't take much for the second best team in the nation in that building to do it. And so now the Sooners come home, they play West Virginia. I think we're going to see a lot of close games. I don't think it's going to be any different moving forward. It's such an even conference. And OU has shown that, right now they would be near the bottom of the league standings. They just contended with the best team in the league, according to all the rankings. We'll see where they go from here, but those close games and their record in them is got to be a concern, given the fact that I think they're going to play a whole lot more close ones.
And you think about it too, home games are going to be so important, especially when you get West Virginia at home. It's almost, you don't want to say must win when you're this early in the conference season, but man, after losing those 2 close home games last week, you really want to try to take care of business. I can say this, I'm upstairs from the court. I'm inside the Lloyd Noble Center. You can hear them. They're screaming. They're focused. They're having a tough practice down there. So we'll see what happens on Saturday. 11 a.m., correct?
11 a.m. I like it. It's like back to football season. Will I see you there?
Yeah,
you can hang in this room.
I'll just pull out a sleeping bag and stay in the media room overnight. Let's switch to football, and just a busy week. And let's start with the breaking news first. Jackson Arnold, National Gatorade Player of the Year. Just another big accomplishment, big accolade for Jackson Arnold.
Yeah, well, we've talked, he was the Texas Gatorade Player of the Year, and that's one accolade, and maybe not all that surprising given the senior season he turned in and the caliber recruit he is. But I imagine OU fans will enjoy this bit of it. He was a finalist alongside a Texas quarterback, soon to be Texas quarterback Arch Manning, and a USC quarterback, Malachi Nelson, and he beats those guys out. That's no small feat. It would not have been any kind of disappointment, I don't think, if he'd finished third among those guys. We're talking about 3 of the best quarterbacks in the nation in a recruiting class that's being talked about as kind of the year of the quarterback. So for Jackson Arnold to win it, it's another accolade, perhaps the last high school accolade he'll collect before getting on campus next week. That's the big part. He's one of the 14 guys who will be here for spring camp and getting into everything. We'll see him in the spring. And so the excitement only bubbles for Jackson Arnold. But he's not the only newcomer, right? We got a lot of portal stuff to talk about.
10 newcomers, 9 scholarship guys. Yeah. It's been crazy. Just since we last talked, it's been crazy with how much action they've had. Andrell Anthony, is that
Andrell? Come on,
Andrell.
that can't. I'm not going to let you get away with that.
Andrell Anthony, that's not a PJ. That's not a PJ. Got kid out of Michigan, wide receiver out of Michigan, filled a need that they need. Davon Sears from Texas State and Rondell Bothroyd. I hope I say that right, from Wake Forest. Among the newcomers this week, they had 3 straight days of getting transfers, and it brings the number up to 10. Just thought it was interesting that they did get that wide receiver that they needed. Anthony, they need that outside threat, that speed threat. It seems like he has all the tools for that. 2 years at Michigan, his freshman year had the big game against Michigan State, 2 touchdowns, 150 plus yards. So
big 93-yard score in there.
So the ability. The big play capability is there, and they really needed someone after losing 4 wide receivers. They needed to fill that spot.
And that's the thing of it, is there's 6 days left. Today's Thursday. There's 6 days left before that deadline. I'd imagine the Sooners are going to try to add more, and wide receiver would still be that place I'd look, because you don't just simply replace a Marvin Mims. And as impressive as some of the attributes that Andrell Anthony brings, he comes from Michigan. He caught 7 passes for 80 yards this year, and maybe they see something there. The skill set jumps off the page. You see what he's got, but we are not talking about a sure thing and what he's got to replace. And Marvin Mims, he was the surest thing Oklahoma's had in the passing game for really the last 3 seasons. And a stat I had, I think I was working on it when we talked last time on the podcast, but Oklahoma is going to be down 66.5% of its receiving production. And that's with Eric Gray, with Braden Willis, Theo Weiss, along with Marvin Mims. So they're going to need more than just Andrell Anthony. And maybe they can find more in the portal in the next week. Maybe there's going to be from within. I know we spent a lot of the fall talking about Jaden Gibson and some of those other young receivers. Maybe it's someone in this new class, but they're going to need a lot there. There's going to be new faces, and so maybe Angelo Anthony is one of them. Maybe they add in this next 6 days. Now, Eric, out of the group that they have taken on from the portal yet, who are you most intrigued by as their position that has jumped out to you the most?
I really think just simply because they really need the help. It was, and I don't, again, I hope we get the last name right. Rondell Bothroyd out of Wake Forest. I mean, here's a guy who's just an impact player and the kind of player that Oklahoma really needs in their system. Last 26 games, 93 tackles, 24 and a half for loss and 15 and a half sacks over the last 2 seasons. 15 and a half sacks, that's a crazy high number. And he was a co-captain for the Demon too. He was a leader at Wake Forest. So I think that's something else that's going to be huge. And it's a position of need. I mean, you look at that defensive line, they had Jacob Lacey from Notre Dame early. They got the Davon Sears from Texas State, which, they beat out Penn State and Tennessee to get him to come to Norman. So I think that's huge. And they got Trace Ford. So I think the defensive line, defensive ends, I think that's huge. But I'm really curious to see how Bothroyd really fits into what Brent Venables wants to do on defense.
Yeah, I think if you wanted any indication of where they felt they had to bolster themselves, the Sooners, there you go. They attacked defensive line really hard, and they brought in effectively. We'll see how it all pans out. I'm sure that's going to be one of the competitions we keep an eye on in the spring and summer. But if they wanted to, they could start a completely new defensive line just through the portal. And I think that's huge. I mean, we saw that defensive line fade over the course of the season. I think in some senses you can look at it as, a front six almost of the 2 linebackers you throw in there. They were so thin at those spots this year. And I think adding there and the way they've added shows you they felt the same and that they've done something to reinforce it. We'll see how all these guys hit, if they're all contributors right away. But that's where they've addressed. And I'm also intrigued. I know he's the one non-scholarship guy on that list, but if all goes what you presume to be according to plan, Luke Elzinga, the preferred walk-on punter, is someone we'll see maybe more than any of these guys next year because they need an heir to Michael Turk, who was such a weapon all year. We heard Brent Venables talk about that often. They're going to need him to be the new big-time punter who can win the position battle, help this defense and help this offense, I guess this team set up in ways that Michael Turk did. So I'm intrigued by him. He'll be far down the list of the real sexy names on that list. But I'm intrigued by him. Maybe it's intriguing that they don't have a kicker yet, or that they've not added one. I know there was, at least among the fan base, some murmuring about the kicking at the end of the season and in the future there. So we'll see what they do these next 6 days. And but I think if you're an Oklahoma fan, you've got to be thrilled with the defensive additions they've made this year, not having to recruit like they did last year, which was so fast-paced, getting the program just up and running again. This year, it seems they've made some pretty considered decisions.
You mentioned the kicker position. Oklahoma's last 4 losses by 3 points each. And there were a lot of big missed kicks in those games too. So I think it's something you really do have to look at. You look at everything if you're Brent Venables and how you want to try to improve everything.
I want to say it was Gavin Schmidt, 5 of his last 6 kicks, or maybe missed kicks in 5 of his last 6 games. It was a rough stretch for him at the end of the season. As you point out, those 3-point losses, they could have used some of those makes there.
When we look at this, you mentioned the wide receivers room and what they have at wide receiver, and new name, not a player, but a coach joined in the program. Emmett Jones from Texas Tech spent the last season as the Red Raiders wide receivers coach and passing game coordinator, going to do the same job at Norman after 1 year there. Interestingly, he was for 3 years prior to Tech. He was at Kansas as the wide receivers coach and spent right before the coaching change at Kansas. He was the interim coach during the spring. So a lot of respect for this young coach. Brent Venables talked about him, said he's really high on what he can bring to Norman. And I had a chance to talk to a couple of his former players at KU who said that everyone was going to love him. Said that those receiver rooms they're going to get a kick out of working with him. They said that before a game he'd be pacing in the locker room with the players, have his headphones on, listening to music. And he would look like he was ready to put on a jersey and go out there and play. So just turned 48 this year. year. We found that out too. So his 48th birthday was his first day at the job. But from everything I heard from the two players that played for him at Kansas, the wide receivers, they said that he'll fight for his players. The players are going to love him, and he's going to expect a lot out of him. So just a big hire for the Sooners.
Yeah, and probably a pretty major note as we're talking about where the Sooners are now. Recruiting was so big this year and will be even more important. When they get to the SEC, I think Monday night, the national title game was a pretty good evidence to the Sooners, not just of what they're going to see when they get to the SEC, but also the importance of stacking classes and recruiting year in, year out. That's Georgia looks like Georgia because they recruit like that. And so that's all important. And Emmett Jones comes with experience and roots in that DFW area. He can recruit Texas. I mean, that's been a major issue for the Sooners on the whole, but building there, having those relationships, he's got that with him too. And his arrival does come at the expense of LaDainian Washington, and who stepped into a pretty difficult situation in August. He was the interim replacement for Cale Gundy after his resignation, and by all accounts, whether you want to talk about players, coaches, Brent Venables himself, smashed the job, did a great job, was a lot of what he'd been promised as. He was an analyst before that who was highly regarded and really lived up to it, and not a bad word said about him. But I think, when we're talking about the level that OU's at and where it's going to be in terms of a football school a few years from now, the experience that Emmett Jones brings is important, the connections he's got. And it was nice to see LaDainian Washington, who, it's worth noting, Brent Venables said in a statement they would try to find an elevated role for him. He's going to be headed to Western Kentucky with what I'm sure is going to be the start, if he sticks with it, of a productive coaching career, because he certainly left a mark in his 1 year with the Sooners.
In my Ian Mall voice, tops.
There you go.
Our photographer, Ian Mall, is a Western Kentucky grad, so I can hear him now saying tops. So
there you go.
I thought, like you said, I agree 100% with what you said about LaDainian. When you think about the position he was put in early August, said, hey, we're going to thrust you into the role as the interim wide receivers coach and bring them all together in one room and have one of the biggest position groups and say, take over in your first coaching job. What he did was amazing. And Oklahoma fans really have to be thankful for what he was able to do during that time as the interim coach. And if anything, it also allowed him to really grow as a coach. There's a reason Western Kentucky probably offered him the job. They know that he has that experience at Oklahoma 1 year, plus got to work with Jeff Levy too. So just a great, I think Oklahoma fans really owe a debt of gratitude to him for what he was able to do. And as well, he had the tweet of the day yesterday when he tweeted, woke up from a map. What did I miss? that tweet came right after the hiring, the announcement of the hiring of the wide receivers coach. So, and then he also had a really nice tweet just talking about how tough a decision it was to leave Norman and go to Western Kentucky. So we'll keep tabs on him. He's one of those coaches we'll keep an eye on too. So a couple other departures too. We talk about coaches. Marvin Mims. We really haven't talked. We talked a little bit a second ago, but Marvin Mims leaving, joining the NFL draft. I don't think that's a big surprise. We've been able to see him really excel in 3 seasons in Norman. And then a starter, David Ugwebu, on defense, announced that he's entering the transfer portal as of today. It's Thursday, about 4:00. We still don't know what his destination will be. But here's a guy who's the second leading tackler on the team. And I know there were fans that really were critical of the way he played, but when you saw the players, the way they stepped up, and to a man on social media, they all thanked him for his leadership, his guidance. And that's one thing you remember. He it may not have been the result you wanted at times on the field, but he did mean a lot to the program, and he worked hard for the program too. And his teammates, he earned the respect of his teammates. So we don't know what's going to happen with David, but he's going to look and find another place too. So a couple players, we talk about leadership, talk about new faces. These are 2 big ones leaving.
As I learned from tweeting on about David Ugwebu, there is a very vocal, maybe it's a minority, but a portion of the fan base that feels strongly about him and how he played this fall. And there's certainly rightful critiques of, that defense. We watch it every week, Eric. There's a lot of critiques to be had. Brent Venables and his staff, I'm sure, would have critiques of how their defense looked at times this fall. But we also know the linebacker position, based on the fact that David Ugwebu, Deshaun White, and Danny Stutzman played virtually every snap. It was a thin position group, and one where they really didn't have much to go on behind those starters. So I think wishing away a guy, and maybe it was a mutually best decision. Maybe the plan next year is not for David Ugwebu to be a starter. It'd be great to go see him, a guy I think I can also say was always there after. He was a pretty prominent figure in terms of post games and a lot of the difficult post games. I know he spoke in Texas. He spoke at TCU, two of the toughest games we saw that defense go through this year. So a loss like him, I don't think is one you wish away. Maybe he finds a better landing spot for him in 2023, but I don't know that the Sooners at this point with the depth, and that's probably one spot they really haven't addressed heavily in the portal is linebacker. Is a guy who's played as much as he has, as many tackles as he has, and who a leader, as you kind of laid out. That is a loss, and now it's going to be a lot on that young talent. Your Jaron Cannix, Kip Lewis, Kobe McKenzie. They have a lot of freshmen they're excited about, but I don't think you can put a price on the experience that David Agwebu did have.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe it was mutual. Maybe it was the win-win for both parties. So we'll see what happens with David. And Dillon Gabriel, how about him?
Yeah.
Announcing that he's staying. I think I think most people thought that he'd come back. I was one of them. I thought, well, he's going to come back, and made the announcement official. I think it's important for him to come back. He has a grasp of this offense, and he's been a little bit more outspoken on Twitter during these recruiting.
The memes, the Dillon Gabriel memes, where have these been?
I know.
I think there's going to be an exhaustive accounting of the memes, perhaps done by myself when the portal closes. Once we're done, I've got to run through these, see where it's coming from, see which the best were. There were some kind of false flags too. One of his best memes was directed at Matt Lee, his old center who went to Miami. So they not all memes are created equal, I guess, and or equally effective. But he is coming back, and he has, since making that announcement, been a lot more creative on social media.
Well, and the big thing with Dillon is, and we've talked about this in the past, how important it'll be for him to be on campus with Jackson Arnold arriving. I mean, every good quarterback has always had a mentor, someone to look up to, and Dillon Gabriel, using a Brent Venables term, he's scarred up. He's played a lot of games. And I think that's going to help. That relationship between Dillon Gabriel and Jackson Arnold is going to be huge. And I think that I think it's good that he's coming back, and they're going to learn. They're going to learn from each other, and it'll be tested by them. So a lot of and like you said, we're not done with the portal stuff. Next week it wraps up the I think Wednesday. Is that correct? The portal,
the 18th
portal window closes on Wednesday, so we'll see what happens with Oklahoma. If there's an offensive lineman out there, they really need to fill that offensive tackle position. It'd be great if they lost a guy to Nebraska from Stanford. It'd been great if they could get him, because they just need experience at that position. I mean, they're building depth. They need to get some experience. It would have been great to get a one-year guy in there just to allow some of the guys behind him to have a year to continue to grow. And now you might get a young guy thrust in those positions. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that was Walter Rouse coming from Stanford, who had the Sooners and Iowa in his final three, and a big win, I guess, for Matt Rule and the Huskers. One more note on Dillon Gabriel. It's not going to be the most important thing once we kick off in September, but just think about the position the Sooners would be in if he had declared for the draft or declared for the portal on January 5th, and the mad dash they'd be making to find a quarterback. Because I think we saw this year how they felt about the quarterback depth they currently have. Jackson Arnold could go on to win 3 Heismans. It does not mean he's ready for Arkansas State on September 2nd and to be a year one starter. And so the fact that they've got security at the position on top of Dillon Gabriel's experience, on top of what we saw him do this fall, is big. Because man, you and I would have had a crazy couple of weeks if they were chasing a quarterback out of the portal right now with how late in the game it is.
Let's switch one last topic, women's basketball, if you don't mind me switching over there. I had a chance to spend time with Taylor Robertson and Jenny Baranczyk this afternoon. That's why I'm in Norman working on a feature on Taylor Robertson, who is 8 3-pointers away from becoming the all-time 3-point leader in women's college basketball history. So had a great time talking to her. The Sooners are 19th overall, coming off an 89-79 win in Lubbock. Playing good basketball, tied for first place in the Big 12. So it's a lot of fun. And Jenny Baranczyk, when we were talking, she said she would love for fans to come out. I mean, because you think about her, you think of Maddie Williams, you think of Anna Lanusa. These are all seniors playing their last home games. You can almost count on one hand how many home games they have left. And she Coach Baranczyk would really love everyone to come out and watch them play. You think they're missing out on something, and they could be, because you look at Oklahoma, they're 14-2, right, or 13-2, excuse me. Tied for first again in the Big 12. It's a fun team to watch, and it was fun watching that game last night too. And you got a chance to watch them play Iowa State, get a big win against Iowa State last weekend.
Well, God, if you want a selling point as to why to go watch this team, it's because not only are some of the best teams in the nation in the Big 12, so they're coming through Norman. But OU is capable of going toe to toe with all of them, and they did that with Iowa State on Sunday last week. And it was Anna Yanusa who was playing. It appears the best basketball she's played since her ACL injury. She's comfortable. She said she was asked, she's her most confident she's been. She said, "Well, I'm getting my confidence from this team being as confident as we are." And what more of a confidence boost is there than not, withstanding Ashley Jones dropping 27 points and everything Iowa State can throw at you. And that right there, you're looking at easily a Sweet 16, Elite 8 contender. And OU dealt with them on their home floor. So there's every reason to keep going. And for fans to be going to these games. If you're frustrated with the men's team, a team that probably won't frustrate you, a team that'll excite you, is this OU women's team, because they're really fun to watch. They're playing fun basketball with Jenny Bronchek, and there's just a lot of good stuff going on with that program in a week where I think a lot of people are disappointed in Porter Moser's bunch.
35 made baskets against the Red Raiders last night. They had 27 assists. They share the basketball. It's fun to watch the ball movement with this team. So and they play Kansas 2:00 Saturday. So it'll be a
doubleheader.
Yeah, that's right. 11 and 2.
Ends at 11. Yeah, there we go. Did Taylor Robertson tell you which game she plans to break the record in? Eddie Radosevich asked. I have no idea why. Our friend from Sooner Scoop. Maybe there's betting considerations there.
She needs 8. They got KU Saturday. They go to TCU, and then a week from Saturday, home Bedlam game. So talk about a Hollywood.
That'd be a time to do it, man.
If she could do it against the Cowgirls on their home court, and my guess is she probably wants to do it on her home court. But more important to her, and she said this more than once when I talked to her, she wants to win games. She doesn't care when the record comes as long as they're winning. And she's really a selfless player like that. She really wants what's best for the team. So had a lot of fun talking to her. So we'll see. Eddie, yeah, there might have been some gambling concerns there. I don't know. We'll see.
I will say too, we're focused on the 3-point record, but when I was there Sunday, Taylor Robertson also passed Danielle Robinson for the all-time minutes record in program history. So she's checking them off on the record books. I don't think there was almost anything other than this 3-point record she needed to do this year to cement this, but she is certainly now in that class among probably a handful of the best players in program history, at least on what she's accomplished, the statistical numbers. She's right there, and she's only building on it.
And Maddie Williams, I don't want to leave out Maddie Williams. Just recently had 4 assists against the Red Raiders. She is the only Oklahoma player to have 2,000 points, 850 rebounds, and 300 assists in her career. So congratulations to Maddie. And again, this is a fun team to watch. So we'll see what happens with them. So Eli, before we wrap up, I guess next week we'll be talking we'll be finalizing this transfer portal, getting ready for a little bit of a break before spring camp, and getting ready for just to see what happens in terms of the 24 class. And it's almost like you think you can take a breath covering football, but I don't know if it never sleeps, does it? Football never sleeps.
No, it doesn't. And beyond football, we've got some Bedlam basketball next week. The men play in Stillwater Wednesday. And then you mentioned the women. Is that next weekend?
Saturday.
It is. Yeah. 21st at 6 p.m. And that one's in Norman. So no reason to not show out for that. And I just, keep your eyes out. I'm going to be ramping up my gymnastics coverage. They're getting started. They open on the 22nd in Norman. After wrapping up, they just went to Las Vegas and cleaned up. It was them and some of the other elite programs in the country. And the defending national champs showed up, took care of their business. They've got a trip to Baton Rouge, and then they open with Utah at home. And man, if we've got softball to look forward to, but maybe the most competitive team on campus might be that gymnastics squad right now.
Yeah, I got some softball stuff coming up, and baseball is going to be right around the corner. You're talking about a national champion and a national runner-up in those two sports.
Yeah.
Gymnastics, you got national champions, and you got a national force in the men. So it's going to be a busy spring. One last thing before I forget. I think you have a bullseye on your back. I don't know if you're glutton for punishment. Ranking the top 10 Big 12 basketball teams.
That's right.
Every Monday, you are going to have a power poll.
Yep.
And that's going to be the hardest power poll in the world to do because there's so much parity, so much closeness. Where'd you have OU and OSU this week?
Oh, let me just to make sure I have it right. And I can say, it was week 1 might have been my easiest job because it was week 1. The games were what they were, but it might get a lot harder for me here. Let's see, just to be certain. Now, this is at the end of basically through 3 league games, I had Oklahoma State edging the Sooners. So they were 6th and OU was 7th. And that was down to, I mean, comparing them after last week was pretty difficult. And it was really down to, I think, the Sooners or the Oklahoma State probably the best win at the time. But now, both have lost midweek in the state of Kansas. We'll see what they do this weekend. And I think these rankings are about to get a whole lot harder on me.
What a fun basketball conference, man.
It really is.
There's no gimmies on that list. I mean, TCU played Texas tough yesterday. I mean, any home game, there's no guarantees even when we're playing at home. So, Eli, we'll be looking forward to that every Monday.
Yep.
And for everyone else, we thank you for watching this podcast, listening to it, wherever you get your platform, whatever platform you use. What we get, so you name them, Eli.
Well, everywhere you get your podcast, I mean, Spotify, Google, Apple. Everywhere. We've got a whole lot of other podcasts at the Tulsa World. We've got the OSU podcast. There's a lot going on in Stillwater. Kelly Hines is back on TU and covering all the ongoings there, the new staff, some intriguing basketball teams. We got plenty going on at the Tulsa World.
Okay, Preps Extra. There's a high school podcast.
Yes, sir.
Bill Haston has a podcast as well, too. So thoughts and prayers to Dean Rule, our colleague at the Tulsa World, who is covering everything happening in Stillwater. It seems like every day there's something going on. So we'll keep up with all of Dean's coverage because he's on top of everything. So thanks again for listening. We'll see you next week on this Oklahoma football, basketball, softball, baseball, gymnastics podcast. Thanks so much.